Happy Wednesday! You're listening to Mama Murdered a Podcast. I'm your host, AB. And this week on Mama Murdered a Podcast, we're going to cover part 6 of Caylee and Casey Anthony. Last week on part 5, we went over the discovery of little Caylee's remains and the time that Casey had spent behind bars waiting for her trial to start before Caylee's body had actually finally been discovered. And her body was actually discovered by the same meter reader who had already called police on multiple different occasions to tell them that he'd seen something suspicious in the woods. I left you hanging last week on some of the evidence that was found on and near little Caylee's body. And I even told you about the bounty hunter that paid to get Casey out on bond, and how she was almost immediately locked back up for all of the stolen money and checks that she'd taken from her supposed best friend Amy. And how we even found out the real Zenaida Gonzalez came forward to press charges on Casey for defamation of character, since Casey Anthony had literally ruined this woman's life by throwing her name out there in her massive ass web of lies. And I don't think I left much out on the highlights from last week's episode. If you haven't already listened to the first 5 parts of this case, then I would highly suggest that you go back and listen to those first. If you're going to try to start the podcast on this episode, don't do it. There is so much more that you haven't heard. And a lot of this isn't going to make a lot of sense. So go back and listen to those first 5 episodes on this case before you try to jump in here. Because I promise you missed a lot, and this episode may not make a whole lot of sense if you try to start it from here. So before I say let's get it, I know I normally try to do a little housekeeping and reminders at the end of every episode, if there is any, because most of the time there's not. But this is exciting, and I only did it because y'all asked for it. So, y'all legit asked for more of me. Some redneck mama from South Carolina, and you wanted more. So I'm gonna give it to you, but just keep in mind that y'all asked for this. I finally pulled the trigger and created a Mama Murdered a Podcast Patreon page, where you have the option to pay either $3 a month or $5 a month, similar to like a monthly subscription. But with those small amounts of money, you also get exclusive content, episode shout-outs, so many other things that won't be here on the regular podcast feed. And I'm also going to make sure that the link is all over the Mama Murdered a Podcast social media accounts. I'm going to make sure to drop it in the episode description and the show notes below each and every episode from here on out. And one last thing that is also pretty exciting that y'all also asked for, I have finally got in touch with somebody. We're linking up to do shirts, tumblers, keychains, stickers, beer koozies, like you name it, you'll be able to find it with Mama Murdered the Podcast image on it. And aside from that, the only thing else that I feel like I need to say is that I live in South Carolina. It is 98 degrees with a real feel of 108, so the air conditioner is on in the she shed while I'm recording. I normally try to cut it off. But if y'all want me alive, y'all gonna have to listen to the background noise of the air conditioner because it is hot out here and your girl's kind of chubby. So we're gonna have to make it work. I'm sorry for the background noise. It is the air conditioner. I'm keeping myself and poor sweet Ryder alive by letting you listen to it in the background. I also want to just say thank y'all so much for the support, all the kind words. This podcast would literally still have 10 listeners if it weren't for y'all sharing, liking, commenting, and posting, and telling people about the podcast. I have been on this podcasting journey with Mama Murdered a Podcast for 10 months. In 10 months, I never would have guessed I would be here. Never. So I absolutely cannot wait to see where we are in the next 6 months. And I also just wanted to share this short story with y'all because I just realized it like 3 days ago and it makes me want to cry. So it was New Year's Day of 2023, this year, that I told my husband that my end of the year goal for the podcast would be to reach 10,000 downloads for Mama Murdered a Podcast. And I could literally almost cry saying this, but it's only July. That 10,000 downloads has already more than doubled in downloads. Doubled. I said doubled. Ugh, I don't know. I love y'all. I love doing this. I love that y'all love me doing this. And I love the fact that you like it here on MMAP. So I'm done gushing, I swear, because we all know why you're really here. So, without further ado, let's get it. Now, the humid and wet terrain that is Florida had not only sped up the decomposition, but it had also caused plant life to grow around the skull after it decomposed. So Caylee had been there long enough to start growing actual vegetation around and on her skeletal remains. And that wasn't the only reason. Another reason was because there had been what was referred to as rootlets growing inside of Caylee's bones. And these rootlets cannot grow on something that is still in the process of decomposition. Rootlets can only grow into bones that are totally decomposed. So rootlets can't grow into like rotting flesh. They can only grow into bones that are completely done decomposing, from the way I understood it at least. And because of all these different things, the autopsy tech didn't think that the body had been moved or tampered with, and that it was very likely that Caylee's body had been there since her death. There was no sign of any kind of drug use found in Caylee's system, which that was pretty hard to rule out, the drug part, because they were testing bones and bone marrow. I mean, they just weren't able to do like a typical toxicology report on her because of her body being completely skeletonized. Which, this toxicology report and no drugs being found in Caylee's system kind of rules out the Zanny the Nanny thing being a code word that Caylee would use for Xanax, drugging Caylee with Xanax so that she could go out. In my opinion, anyways. So, again, the Xanax theory was never able to be proven, so it is just that, a theory. And it was also pretty widely believed that Caylee was murdered sometime around the general month of June, when she was last seen alive, and the month of July, when Cindy finally reported Caylee as a missing child. Now, like I mentioned, all of this autopsy stuff and forensic type stuff took a few weeks to complete. And another thing that I mentioned last week was the law that gives anybody living in Florida, well, basically anybody, access to basically every piece of information. So literally everyone had access to all those gory graphic details from Caylee's autopsy and what her cause of death was. And this was all just too much for George. On January 22nd, 2009, George drove himself to a motel in Daytona Beach and he checked himself in. George had also taken a bunch of pills from his house with him when he left that day. But thankfully, people were paying attention and George was reported missing that same day. And police were also made aware of the fact that he had left the house with all these pills. The day after George checked himself into the motel in Daytona Beach, police were able to track him down. And when they arrived, they learned that this was George's attempt at suicide after learning everything that had happened to his granddaughter Caylee. And this could be looked at one of two ways. Either he was genuinely messed up about finding out all of these horrible and graphic things, or his guilty conscience was eating him alive, and we'll probably never know for sure. This case will probably be a lot like JonBenet Ramsey, and we'll never actually know the truth about anything. And I just went back and listened. This audio is going to be horrible with the air conditioner background noise. I'm not sure what else to do as far as, like, I could maybe record in my car, but I feel like you're still going to hear the air conditioner, and the building is pretty soundproof. So, I'm really sorry. It is so hot. If I cut the air off, we will legitimately die out here in this little tiny building. So, we're going to make it work, and I'm going to try to figure something out. I already got my husband on it. He's in the house trying to work on something now. So let's keep going. We'll thug it out this week, and hopefully I can get something else worked out because it is summertime. I'm going to need AC. So when George was found at this motel in Daytona, there was a suicide note that was left in the motel room for whoever found him. Whoops. I know y'all heard that. And the people that think that George was involved, a lot of the time say that this letter sounds like an admission of guilt. But I personally don't think that Cindy or George really had anything to do with what happened to Caylee. I think Casey was involved, but not so much Cindy and George. And like I said, that's my opinion. You're free to have your own very different opinion, but this is just what I think. So I'm going to read you this suicide letter and see if you think it sounds like he's admitting guilt for something that he had done to Caylee or anything in relation to her murder. And then y'all let me know on my socials what you think. So let's get into it. And I may just read bits and pieces of this letter for time's sake, but we'll see. So the letter starts out and it says, Cynthia Marie, as you get this letter, this should be no surprise that I have decided to leave this earth, because I need to be with Caylee Marie. I cannot keep going because it should be me that is gone from this earth, not her. I have lived many years and I am satisfied with my decision because I have never been the man that you, Lee, Casey, and especially Caylee Marie deserved. I have never been the man that any of you could count on. I always let each of you down in more ways than I can remember. I do not feel sorry for myself. I am just sorry I burdened all of you the way I have. My loss of life is meaningless. I cannot be strong anymore. Caylee Marie, our granddaughter. I miss her. I miss her so much. I know you do too. You were always the one that provided for her. What did I provide? I blame myself for being gone. For months. As a matter of fact, for a year or so, I brought stuff up, only to be told not to be negative. I sit here, falling apart because I should have done more. She was so close to home. Why was she there? Who placed her there? Why is she gone? Why? For months, you and I, especially you, always questioned why. I want this to go away for Casey. What happened? Why could she not come to us? Especially you. Why not Lee? Who is involved in this stuff for Caylee? I'm going crazy because I want to go after these people Casey hung with prior to Caylee being gone. This is why I got that gun. I wanted to scare these people. They know more than what they have stated. You cannot sugarcoat things with these people. They need hard knocks to get information from. Sure, that will not bring Caylee Marie back, but was Casey threatened? Casey does not deserve to be where she is. I miss her. I miss her so much. I'm worried about her. Her personal safety is always on my mind. I cannot function knowing our granddaughter is gone. Caylee Marie never had a chance to grow. I have taken what meds was given to me with alcohol, and I'm ready to give up. As you can tell by my writing and thinking, I'm getting very stupid. Wow, what a word. Stupid. Yes, I am. Again, I do not feel sorry for myself, but yes, I am stupid. I cannot deal with this stuff anymore. The loss of Caylee Marie, the loss of Casey, the loss of us. Cynthia Marie, the meds. I am ready. Saying goodbye now, please understand it is for the best. I do not deserve life anymore. Any more us, I never got to say goodbye. I am at this place, and it's all getting fuzzy and my writing is all over the place. I love you. I love you. I hope you get to see Casey soon. All the people we met, wow, this writing is getting weird. I love you. I'm sorry. I will take care of Caylee when I get to God. I am so tired. At least I shaved today. Wow, I'm tripping out. I am sorry. I love you, Cynthia Marie. Caylee, here I come. And that was the end of George's suicide letter to his family that was found shortly after little Caylee's remains were found and after the autopsy was done, and again after a lot of the facts about Caylee's discovery were made public. But I still don't see this letter being misconstrued as an admission of guilt or anything like that. But again, that's just my opinion. Let me know on the socials what y'all think about this letter, because it's interesting, but I really don't think it shows any sort of guilt. I mean, he's even asking why Caylee was so close to home. Who put her there? Why did they put her there? Why did Casey feel like she couldn't come to them? He's questioning all these things. Now, this letter from George and the fact that he'd attempted suicide shortly after Caylee's remains were found would later be brought up in Casey's trial, but we'll get there. But did you catch the part of the letter where George writes about the people that Casey hung around with? Yeah, so Casey's parents obviously still don't think that Casey was involved at this point, but they do think that the people she was hanging out with may have had something to do with what happened to Caylee. Now, obviously, this suicide wasn't successful, and George was able to be saved before his life ended. But now that we at least have a body, we can now have a crime and charges to go along with it. So on April 13th, 2009, the prosecutor's office announced that they planned to go for the death penalty for Casey Anthony. And the prosecutors would later go on with this theory that Casey made chloroform at home, and that Casey then used this homemade chloroform to drug Caylee and to incapacitate her. Prosecutors theorized that after Casey had chloroformed Caylee, that Casey then wrapped the duct tape around Caylee's head the 3 different times. And with this evidence about the chloroform being found, police and investigators wanted to check all the computers to see if any searches were made about chloroform. Now, Casey's laptop was searched first, and this was the laptop that Casey would have been using while she was staying with her boyfriend Tony during those 31 days that Caylee had been missing for. And what would you know? Casey's laptop had been completely wiped clean. That's weird. That's suspicious. So they started searching the computers inside of the Anthony home for keywords like chloroform. And at first glance, they didn't find anything of real value. But after they dug through some old deleted and archived files, ding, 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 ding. Because we all know you can delete things from your phone and your laptop, or any electronic device really, especially these days, but it's usually not actually gone, ever. It can normally be recovered within a certain amount of time after it was deleted, and that's when it was discovered that the word chloroform had been searched on the computer a number of different times, and it was even found that in March of 2008, there were 2 different searches that were made for the word chloroform on the Anthony's home computer. What a shocker. And there had even been a phrase that was actually typed out into the actual search bar of the search engine that said, quote, "How to make chloroform." Now, Casey's mom, Cindy, would later say during Casey's trial that these searches were made by her. So now Cindy's saying she's the one that had been searching for chloroform. Cindy says that she had been worried about her dogs being poisoned by bamboo and that she'd been trying to search for the word chlorophyll, but on the 2 days and times that these searches were made, it was able to be proven that Cindy wasn't even home on the dates and times that the searches for chloroform were made. So Cindy's saying she was trying to search for chlorophyll, and it auto-corrected to chloroform. But somebody please explain to me how the hell was she searching something on a home computer when she wasn't actually home? Also, if you know how to be in 2 places at once and do 2 different things from those 2 different places at once, please, for the love of God, DM me or email me and let me know how to do that, because that would definitely help me in my life right now. I could definitely use an extra me in some cases. But Cindy's a real ride or die, and she said that she was the one at home, she was the one making those searches for chloroform, that they were actually supposed to be searches for chlorophyll, and she said that to a panel of jurors in a courtroom full of people while she was under oath testifying, which I'm pretty sure is actually illegal as fuck. So essentially the prosecution was able to prove that Cindy's key card thing that nurses use to scan shit, so they can keep up with who's distributing what meds and things like that. Okay, so that nurse's card that belongs to Cindy had been used on both of those days, on both of those times that the searches for chloroform were made, and she had been at work for at least an entire 9-hour shift at work. So there is absolutely no way in hell that Cindy was the one that made these searches. And they went even further than that to prove that Cindy was lying, because they were able to determine that there had only ever been 2 searches that were done about dogs, ever done on the Anthony's home computer. And those 2 searches that were in any way, shape, or form related to dogs were actually about dogs having fleas, not about dogs being poisoned by eating bamboo. So this is so blatantly obvious that this was a lie and Cindy did not actually make those searches, and that those searches weren't even about her dogs being poisoned by bamboo. Which, thinking about it now, if I were in this situation where I was needing to Google if I thought bamboo would hurt my dog Ryder or not, I feel like I would probably be searching something along the lines of, will my 9-pound dog eating bamboo hurt him? Or is bamboo poisonous to my dog? I don't think I would be searching how to make chlorophyll at home if I was worried about Ryder being poisoned by some bamboo. So, the lie detector test determined that that was a lie. And this lie really makes it seem like Cindy's just trying to cover for Casey in any way that she can, which is a completely normal thing for Cindy to do for Casey. She's been covering for Casey's lies for her entire life. So why would she stop now? But I really don't think that Cindy and George were involved in Caylee's death. And again, this is my own opinion. You're allowed to have your very own opinion. But I still can't figure out why Cindy would do this. And keep in mind that these searches had been deleted from the Anthony's home computer. So somebody knew that they had made these searches. They also knew that these searches didn't look good. And they also tried to delete those searches and hide them to cover up the fact that they had been made to start with. Now, prosecutors would also claim during the trial that Casey put Caylee's body into the trunk of her car and that she left Caylee's body there for days and possibly even weeks before the smell of a dead and decomposing body started to become unbearable, and that's when Casey decided to abandon her car in the parking lot where it would be towed from later on. And Casey's such an idiot that she probably thought that leaving the car sitting in the parking lot and then letting her car get, sit in a tow yard for as long as possible before her parents found out, that the car sitting in the tow yard would give her enough time to let the car, air out the smell of the decomposing body, but it did not. The car didn't end up airing out at all. It actually probably made the smell worse just because of the heat and humidity of Florida weather. Now, Casey's defense tried to file a motion to take the death penalty off the table for Casey, but the judge denied this motion in December of 2009 and basically said that it would be up to the jury if the death penalty would be an option or not. So now let's talk about some of the friends that Casey made while she was in jail, waiting, her defense attorneys getting everything ready for her trial. Because the inmates that Casey befriended are either full of shit, or they're looking to be a part of a super high-profile case, or Casey actually felt close enough with them to tell them things that she would never admit to anyone else. So the person that Casey was probably the closest to while she was in jail was a woman by the name of Robin Wilson. Now, Robin was in jail about some drug charges, and she and Casey were presumably pretty close. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of letters that were written between Casey and Robin Adams while Casey was in jail. Now, Casey and Robin had actually gotten so close that Robin would be summoned to testify during Casey's trial. And according to Robin, Casey had told her on more occasion than one that she would often knock Caylee out so that she could go out and party and do whatever she wanted to do. And that Caylee would always sleep through the night, and then in the morning, Caylee would always wake up and be perfectly fine. But Robin had two different stories about what Casey actually used to knock Caylee out. At first, Robin said that Casey told her that she used antihistamines like Benadryl or allergy meds or other meds like that are known to make you pretty drowsy. And that, at first, that's what she said that Casey had used to knock Caylee out. But then, in another version of what Casey supposedly told Robin claims that Casey told her that she used chloroform to knock Caylee out. So, who knows which version is the truth, or if any of it's the truth. But if Casey was using chloroform to knock Caylee out, where was she getting chloroform? How was she getting it? Because if she was using it, she had to have been getting it from somebody or from somewhere. Because we all know that she's not smart enough to actually make chloroform at home, and I don't care how many times she's Googled it. Now, Casey and Robin had big plans for when they got out of jail. They were going to travel together, they were going to see the world together. Casey said she was going to dye her hair so that no one would recognize her. She was going to change her name. She was asking what name she should pick, and so on and so forth. But this isn't the only person that Casey met in jail that she supposedly told about using chloroform to knock Caylee out so that she could go out, party, to the clubs, do whatever she wanted. The next woman that Casey got pretty close with in jail was a woman by the name of Myyy, I think's how you say it. And Myyy and Casey were in the cell right beside of one another in jail. Now, Myyy also claims that Casey admitted to her that she would use chloroform to knock Caylee out. But Myyy also claimed that Casey had even been able to tell her details about Caylee's body long before Caylee's remains were ever discovered by Roy the meter reader. So, according to Myyy, Casey knew details about the way that Caylee's body was found, things surrounding Caylee's body, etc., and she was able to tell this to Myyy way before Caylee's remains were ever discovered by the meter reader. Now, since Myyy and Casey were, they lived next door to each other, how do you word that in jail? I don't know. Their cells were right beside of each other. They would just kind of talk through the walls or the vents to each other. But Casey and Robin, the other woman, Robin, her and Casey would usually write notes back and forth since their cells were further away from each other. And in April of 2010, a guard at the jail where Casey was being kept, named Sylvia Hernandez, she got suspended from her job as a disciplinary action, and Sylvia got suspended with pay, which I think is weird. But she got suspended from the jail because she was helping Casey and other inmates pass notes back and forth to each other, which is a big no-no in jail, especially if you're one of the guards. Like, Caylee could have been trying to get a note to somebody to have her call somebody on the outside and have them dump evidence or change their stories, or, I mean, it could be anything. That's why they don't allow that. And they definitely don't allow that if you're a guard. So there were plenty of letters and notes that were discovered that had been written back and forth between Caylee and these couple of women that she had been confiding in while she was incarcerated. But between the dozens and dozens of letters that were found that had been written between Caylee and the woman Robin, there was never any mention of chloroform or any mention of Caylee drugging Caylee with any kind of drug whatsoever in any of these letters. But I also feel like this isn't something that you would be, like, eagerly writing down on a piece of paper either. So even if there's nothing that says that Caylee drugged Caylee in those letters, as dumb as Caylee is, I don't think she's dumb enough to actually write about it in a letter to send to somebody else who's also in jail. Because when you're writing letters back and forth in jail, your cell can be torn apart and searched at any given time for absolutely no reason at all. So I almost feel like even if this is something that the two women had talked about, this isn't something that they would have written down in letters back and forth to one another. Now, do I believe that Caylee told these women these things about drugging Caylee? I don't know. Just because inmates will turn on one another in a quick minute if they think it will reduce their sentence or if they think it'll benefit them in any way. There are also a lot of things that inmates talk about that wouldn't be found on a piece of paper. But there are also a lot of things that inmates talk about that they know better than to write down on a piece of paper. So I don't know if I believe that Caylee would have told these women anything like this or not, honestly, because even if Caylee did tell both of these women that she drugged Caylee, Caylee has been lying her ass off since she was old enough to speak a full sentence. So even if she did tell them she drugged Caylee before, was that a lie or was she telling the truth? We'll never know either way. Now, the next thing that happens in the trial was June 15th, 2010. There was an evidentiary hearing for Casey Anthony's trial. And an evidentiary hearing or ruling is just where the judge goes through and says what will and what won't be allowed to be used as evidence during the trial. Now, during this evidentiary hearing, the new judge agreed with the prosecution and said that the statement that Cindy had made to the 911 dispatcher would be able to be used in the trial as evidence. Cindy had gotten on the stand and basically said that she tried to say that Casey's car didn't actually smell like there had been a literal dead body in the car, but that she was using that phrase more like a figure of speech and not so much in the literal sense. But during that 911 call, Cindy said, and I quote, "It smells like there's been a dead body in the damn car." So I don't know. I guess you could take that in a literal sense or in a figurative sense, depending on how you want to look at it. But the judge basically said that the statement could be used in trial as evidence, so of course it most definitely would be. And that one simple phrase has to be a statement that Cindy wishes she'd never spoken. Or at the very least, something that she wishes that she had worded differently. Because this one little sentence has bitten Cindy in the ass every time she's turned around since the second it came out of her mouth. Now, the badass judge who said that Casey and the truth were strangers ended up having to recuse himself from the case as the judge because Casey's attorney, Jose Baez, basically said that this judge had a vendetta against Casey and that he had already been pretty biased about what he thought had happened before the trial had ever even started. And this judge had been doing too many media interviews and yada yada yada. This is what Jose's saying. So there is a new judge set to preside over the trial from here on out. Now, the next, memorable thing that happened from the trial would be September 14th, 2010, when Casey's legal team got a little bit more extensive. Casey originally had 3 attorneys, and now she would have 6 working around the clock on her case. And supposedly, the new 3 lawyers that had been working on Casey's case were all doing it pro bono, or free. In other words, pro bono is free. And I'm gonna, bullshit here. That's all I'm gonna say. Allegedly. And now is probably a good time to get into the fact that there are so many different theories about how Casey was paying her legal team. Because as we know, she did not have a job and her parents were always financially unstable. And one big thing that we have to keep in mind is that Jose Baez wasn't this high-profile, go-getter, high-end attorney back then. The Casey Anthony trial literally made Jose Baez's name and his career what it is today. So he probably didn't cost an ungodly amount of money back then when Casey's trial was going on, like he would charge nowadays. There are theories that say that Casey was likely sleeping with her attorney, Jose Baez, as a form of payment, allegedly, supposedly, all the things to not get me sued. And there are even multiple people who claim to have seen Casey completely naked with Jose in his office. And then there are other people who swear that they've actually seen Casey and Jose physically having sex, but I don't think that's ever been proven from my understanding. There were also other rumors and theories that went around for a time that said that Casey was selling pictures of Caylee to news outlets and media sources as a way to make money to be able to pay for her legal team. And I've always seen and heard it said that Casey started selling these pictures of Caylee after Caylee's remains were discovered. So either way, that's not a cute look. So she was presumably selling her body and sex to pay her legal defense team, and she was also supposedly selling pictures of her dead toddler to media and news outlets as a way to pay for her defense team. So either way, that doesn't look good. And through the grapevine, rumor had it at the time that Casey's defense attorney, Jose Baez, had been the one to actually help Casey set up the picture sales of Caylee to the media, and that those pictures were selling for upwards of, are you ready? $200,000. And because of the picture selling rumors, the prosecution was able to get a motion approved that would prevent anyone from selling pictures of Caylee when she was alive, but then this motion would also prevent anyone from being able to sell pictures of Caylee's remains after she was found as well. I don't even know why this needs to be said, or why this needs to be a motion for a judge to say yes or no about, but here we are. Because who the fuck would even do that to start with? It's sickening. So these pictures weren't even able to be seen by anyone until the trial actually started. And as it turns out, Casey would later admit to the judge before her trial started that she had in fact sold pictures of Caylee. Like I said, nobody besides Casey Anthony would do this. Nobody besides her would think that this is okay. Now, the judge that Casey had admitted this to was the same judge that would end up having to recuse himself from the trial. So her confession about selling pictures of Caylee and stuff, that all happened before the new judge was assigned to oversee her trial. So Casey had admitted to selling pictures of Caylee to the judge that was previously over her trial, the one that had said that Casey and the truth were strangers. So this all had happened before the new judge was assigned, and just that statement that the first judge made about Casey and the truth being strangers was probably enough of a reason that Casey's defense attorney, Jose Baez, would use that statement to be able to get a new judge to reside over Casey's trial in the first place. Because even though it's true, Casey and the truth are in fact strangers, but with this being a judge that said this, that's not okay. As much as I think Casey's guilty, the judge is supposed to be unbiased about everything. So I could see why Casey's defense team was like, hell nah, get this judge out of here. And it worked. Now, this trial is the first time that I know of where the smell of a dead or decomposing body was able to be used in the trial as legitimate evidence. And Casey's defense attorney, Jose Baez, would even go on to try to get the mere mention of the word chloroform excluded from Casey's trial. And luckily, the new judge was like, that's a no for me, dog. We're going to let them know about the chloroform searches. On May 9th, 2011, the jury selection for Casey Anthony's trial started, and it took a good bit of time for the jury selection to finally be over, which doesn't really come as a surprise to me. This was a super highly publicized case, and everyone knew the faces and the names of damn near everybody in the Anthony family. Casey's lawyer did try to get the trial moved to a different city or state, claiming that Casey likely wouldn't get a fair trial because this case was so publicized and so well known in Florida. But I feel like this case was publicized and well known everywhere just for the fact that Casey had been okay with her daughter being missing for a whole last month and still wasn't the one that had reported her missing. So the judge kind of met the lawyers halfway, and instead of moving the trial, they just picked jurors from a different jurisdiction to sit through Casey's trial. And even doing that and getting a jury that wasn't as local, I'm sure there were still plenty of jurors who were called, and they'd already made their minds up long before this trial had ever started on whether they thought Casey was either guilty or innocent. And that doesn't really work with a jury selection. You have to have a pretty unbiased jury as well. So I would have never made it onto this jury for this case for sure. Now, the jury selection started on May 9th, 2011, and finally, on May 24th, 2011, the trial was set to start. And when Casey entered the courtroom, she looked like a respectable, productive member of society. She wasn't wearing a skin-tight dress. She had on like one of those dressy suit-type deals. And she came in wearing no makeup with like a pretty modest-looking ponytail. She honestly looked like she'd just left Sunday morning service. The prosecution and the defense laid out their opening statements, and of course, in the months leading up to the trial, the prosecution had tried to get a gag order so that Casey's defense attorney, Jose Baez, wouldn't be able to do an interview about this case every 20 minutes. But the gag order was denied. And finally, the trial for Casey Marie Anthony was officially set to start on May 25th, 2011. This trial would include 12 jurors and 5 alternate jurors, all ranging in different ages and races. And with that, the trial of the state versus Casey Marie Anthony on the charges of first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter of a child, and 4 different counts of providing false information to law enforcement was ready to begin. And the entire world was watching. And I remember when this trial started, me and my husband had just started dating, and we were already pregnant with our first son because we were stupid, horny teenagers, and we literally got pregnant a month after we started dating. But that's besides the point. I remember sitting in the living room of my in-laws' house and being completely glued to the TV. I would only use the restroom during commercial breaks, and I even ate all my meals in front of the TV. Now, my husband says now that this should have been a sign that I was a little too much into murdery things, but I mean, it's too late now. He loves me already. So I just remember being completely intrigued with every part of this case for obvious reasons. And for the entire 6-week-long trial, I watched every single piece of it. Now, granted, that was a lot of years ago. My memory has never been good, so I don't remember every single detail. I just remember being so caught up in this trial and this case in general. For me, this trial was similar to, like, 9/11. Not in the tragic, world-crushing sense that, like, not like that, but I remember where I was, what I was doing, and especially how I was absolutely soul-crushed to hear then the jury come back with an acquittal against Casey for the murder of little Caylee. So let's go over some of the bigger and more memorable and more important pieces of this 6-week-long trial. So, of course, the prosecution got through how Caylee had been missing for 31 days and how Casey had never even bothered to report her daughter missing. As I've already said, Cindy was the one that finally called police to tell them that she hadn't seen her granddaughter in weeks and weeks. And this prosecutor, she went on to say how Casey left the house with Caylee on June 16th, 2008, how she told her parents that they were going to visit with Zanny the nanny, and that they'd probably be spending the night with Zanny. And then she goes through how there was no Zanny the nanny, and how Caylee being gone for those 31 days basically allowed Casey to live her life as if she'd never had a child. The prosecution then went into how Caylee's remains were discovered, and then the prosecutor even went into some more details about how Caylee's body was actually found, with the skull being detached from the body and things like that. And during this entire thing, if you actually watch the video of Casey listening to the prosecutor talk, she's just shaking her head almost like robotically. No emotion, no remorse, no tears, absolutely nothing from Casey. Besides the fact that she's just shaking her head back and forth kind of slowly. And like I said, it looks very robotic in a sense. And then the prosecution starts going over the evidence that they have against Caylee. She brings up the chloroform searches, the amounts of chloroform found in the trunk of Caylee's car. And then the prosecutor brought up the foolproof suffocation search. She also brought up the searches about neck breaking and even a search about the term shovel. Now, during this trial, the prosecution, of course, used every single piece of evidence that had been found, from the searches down to the air quality testing that had been done on the air in the trunk of Caylee's car. And they were coming full force with everything they could possibly think of. But when it was time for Caylee's defense attorney, Jose Baez, to do his defense lawyer thing, Jose goes into this speech about how Caylee could live for 31 days knowing that her daughter was missing. And according to Jose, this was simple. Caylee was able to live this way because Caylee had never actually been missing. Jose says that Caylee had actually already been dead and that Caylee knew it. And that's why she'd never called to report Caylee missing. Jose claimed that Caylee had actually drowned in the Anthony family swimming pool on June 16, 2008, and everyone in the courtroom is listening to Jose lay out his story of what supposedly happened to Caylee, and Caylee's parents, Cindy and George, are in the audience listening, along with the jury, the judge, and everybody else who's gathered around Jose for story time. And according to Jose, this is how the events of the day went. He claims that Caylee drowned in the family swimming pool, which is the #1 cause of death for kids in Florida. And that when Caylee drowned in the pool, that Caylee did what she was so used to doing her whole life. She went into a shell of herself and into denial, and that Caylee had been doing this since she was a small child. She had almost perfected pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't, and this was just her coping mechanism. And boy, did Jose have a bombshell that he likely could not wait to drop on the entire courtroom and the entire nation watching. That's when Jose started pushing the narrative towards Caylee's dad, George. And according to Caylee's lawyer, Jose, George had been coming into Caylee's room late at night since she was about 8 years old. Now, this doesn't seem weird. George is her dad, and Caylee was his child. Of course he would be coming into her room. But according to Jose, George was only coming into Caylee's room late at night, or when they were both home alone, so that he could touch her inappropriately. Now, Jose Baez had brought in 2 expert witnesses that weren't on the list of expert witnesses that the prosecution had already, so the judge pulled both the prosecution and the defense into his chambers. And this is where the 2 expert witnesses would go on to explain how George had started touching Caylee when she was about 8 years old, according to Caylee, of course, but that the sexual abuse had continued and gradually become worse over time. George had originally just been touching Caylee inappropriately when she was about 8 years old, and that quickly morphed into oral sex, vaginal sex, and even included other things. Now, according to what Caylee told her defense attorney, Jose Baez, George had continually sexually abused Caylee from the age of 8 up until she was in her early to mid-teenage years. Caylee had also claimed that her older brother Lee had come into her bedroom once when they were both younger. Now, this was a claim that says that Caylee was in her room asleep when Lee came in and was kind of fondling her, touched her boobs, and when Caylee woke up, Lee just kind of stared at her and didn't really say anything before he just turned around and left out of her room. And according to Caylee, this only happened once with her brother Lee, but it was an ongoing thing that occurred between her and her dad George for years. Now, what does any of this have to do with Caylee being missing or found dead and Caylee being on trial for the murder? Well, I'll tell you. According to Caylee, she claims that she always made Caylee sleep in her bed with her, and she always made Caylee go to bed at the same time that she went to bed. And Caylee even says that she made sure that Caylee knew to wake her up in the morning when she was ready to go out into the rest of the house. And Caylee says that she did this as a way to protect Caylee from George and his molestation. But Caylee says that on the morning of June 16th, that she had slept in a little longer than usual. And that at about 9 a.m. that morning, George came into Caylee's room to wake her up, and he was frantically asking her where Caylee was. And Caylee gets up and she's like, I have no idea. I thought she was in the room with me still. she hadn't woke me up to tell me we were going into the rest of the house. So Casey says that she got up and out of bed to search around the house, while her dad George searched around the outside of the Anthony house. Now, while George was searching the perimeter of the outside of the house, he did find Caylee, and that she was already limp, and he pulled her out of the swimming pool that was in the backyard of the house. Now, Casey claimed that George had brought Caylee's wet, limp, tiny body inside of the house, and that's when George had told Casey that this was all her fault. And from here, Casey says that she saw Caylee and that she knew she was gone, and that she just kind of panicked and ran back into her bedroom. And according to Casey, this would be the last time that she ever saw her daughter Caylee again. So basically, this story goes that George finds Caylee's dead body in the pool, he carries her inside of the house, and Casey runs off to her bedroom, never to see Caylee again. Okay, because that makes sense. And there are a lot of theories out there that say that maybe the reason that Casey would never tell anyone who Caylee's dad was is because Casey knew that Caylee's dad was actually her own dad, George. Or there's other theories that say maybe Caylee's dad was her own brother, Lee. And the rumor mill went rampant with these sexual assault allegations when they first came out during Casey's trial. So during this trial, it was said that Casey and George didn't actually, have a conversation about what they should do with Caylee's body. But this will change later, 10 years later, when Casey does the infamous Peacock documentary type of series, which I do plan to get to at some point after I finish this case, but I'll probably do a few cases before I do the Peacock series episode, just because I feel like at this point we could all use a break from hearing about Casey Anthony. So this story does eventually change, but for now in the timeline that we're still in the trial. So during the trial, Jose claimed that Casey went into her bedroom after seeing George holding her daughter's wet, dead body, and that this would be the last time that Casey saw Caylee. Now, during the trial, Casey had also talked to a psychiatrist named Dr. Jeffrey Danzinger, and Casey had told him what she believed had happened to Caylee. But this wasn't the story that Casey's defense team used during the trial, and the judge didn't actually unseal the deposition from the psychiatrist and Casey until sometime in January of 2012, after the trial was over. But I did want to include what Casey told Dr. Zandinger. I don't know why that's so hard to say. But I wanted to include this because I feel like it's pretty telling once you have a full picture of everything that happened, or everything that we think happened or have been told that had happened. Now, also keep in mind that Dr. Zandinger interviewed Casey 5 different times over a 2-year span, but he was never called to testify at her trial. Probably because what she told him didn't match up with what the defense was planning to use. Now, in these unsealed depositions, Casey told the doctor that she had been impregnated with Caylee while she had been passed out at a party, but that she doesn't really remember anything else from the party. Casey also told this doctor that she believed that her dad George had started molesting her daughter Caylee, and Casey believes that Caylee had finally gotten old enough to start fighting back with George during these molestations, or she believed that Caylee was finally old enough to tell someone what George had been doing to Caylee, and then in turn this would leave George to feel like he had no choice but to kill Caylee. And I feel like now's a good stopping point because not only do I hate this audio, I can hear every single thing in the background. The air conditioner going, it just started pouring. Apparently there was a tornado literally 5 miles up the road. The weather is acting a fool right now. I'm not happy with this episode. I'm done for the day. I do think that I'll be able to finish up the trial next week. And then the only thing I plan to cover after that is kind of like, where are they now? And I'm going to keep that short and sweet. So I am confidently saying that next week should probably allegedly supposed to be the last episode on this series. And I think I might even let y'all hold me to it this time because I feel like I honestly could finish it in one more episode. So with all that being said, we'll pick this case up next week. And don't forget to go join the Patreon. Don't forget to rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts. Leave a 5-star rating on Spotify. And keep in touch with your girl on social media. If you're not already, make sure to check the Mama Murdered a Podcast TikTok out at Mama Murdered a Podcast. You can also find me on Facebook at Mama Murdered a Podcast. And I also dabble in the Twitter sphere and the Instagram life. So, on Twitter and Insta, you can find me at murdered_mama. You can also email me at mamamurderedapodcast. And I'm specifically asking listeners to send me your crazy-ass stories through email. Have you encountered a murderer? Have you ever been stalked? Have you ever felt like you got out of a situation and possibly escaped with your life, but don't have any proof, but it was scary as shit? Do you have any alien stories, ghost stories, any close calls, or did your mom date Ted Bundy? Like, I want to know all your business, but I also want to be able to read it on the podcast. I want to be able to do an episode, maybe once or twice a month, with stories from y'all. So if you have something crazy, send it to me in as much detail as possible. I want all the details. I want all the tea. You can send those stories to mamamurderedapodcast@gmail.com. If you need me to change names, just say that. If you don't want me to use your name, just say that. I will make up names for you, and any characters that need name changes, just let me know somewhere in that email. I do plan to read these on the podcast. I do plan to try to keep doing this as a series. And the first episode, with as many emails as I've gotten in the last few days, will probably be out sometime in the next 2 weeks. So that'll be fun. I think it'll be really interesting to see the crazy shit that y'all have gone through. And I may throw in a scary-ass story or two of my own. We'll see. So that's all I got for y'all this week. I gotta go. It's pouring down rain. The air conditioner's going. I'm hating this audio. I'm sorry you're having to listen to it. I probably won't even go back and listen to this one because I'm so frustrated every time I go back and listen. I'm gonna try to clean it up, but I tried that yesterday and I ended up deleting the entire audio and then having to spend 4 hours on Google to try to recover the audio that still had the damn background noise in it. So I got it fixed, and the background noise is gone. It sounded perfect, and then I couldn't find it. I couldn't get it to play when I could find it. I lost it for a while. Like, I thought I was going to have to redo this entire episode. And then once I got it back, it was the original, unedited audio with all the background noise. So, I mean, take me as I am. I'm not perfect. This audio is not perfect. This podcast is not perfect, and that's okay. We love it here. And if you love it here, I'm going to drop the Patreon link in the episode description or the show notes of this episode. You can click on that. You can join the Patreon. I created 2 separate tiers to choose from on the Patreon account. The first one being the $3 a month tier. That one is titled, We Broke But We Love It Here, because same. And for $3 a month, you'll get a shout out on the podcast at least once a month. You'll also get an ad-free episode, so the episode that is uploaded to the regular feed every week will be ad-free. And then we have the $10 a month tier, and for $10 a month, this one is labeled, We Here for the Free Shit, because, again, same. And for $10 a month, you can expect a shout-out on the regular episodes every week that are uploaded on Wednesdays to the regular feed. You'll also get a bonus episode every month, and both the regular episode and the bonus episode will both be ad-free. You can also expect to receive a free sticker with your membership and access to vote on cases that you'd like to hear each month. And those polls will be used for the bonus episodes, not the regular feed, so the exclusive bonus episodes that come with the $10 a month tier. So if that's something you're interested in, go to the Patreon link below, sign up. And if that's not something that you're comfortable doing, because I know a lot of people are kind of weird with subscriptions that automatically come out of your account every month, I get that. So I did create a PayPal account for the podcast. You can find that at Mama Murdered a Pod. So podcast without the cast. It's just Mama Murdered a Pod on PayPal. I think that's all the house cleaning I'm supposed to do, and I think I told y'all to sign up on the Patreon the right way. I'm not sure. This is my first time doing this too. And if you don't want to do any of that, then that's fine too, because we can still do it again, same time, same place, next Wednesday. See you then.
That's how my mama murdered a podcast.